Hello, 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 and welcome to another episode of the Hilaritas podcast with me, your host, Mike Gathers. Join me here as we explore the vast world of iconic writer, psychedelic psychologist, rebel philosopher, and self-proclaimed agnostic mystic, Robert Anton Wilson. Visit us at hilaritaspress.com/podcast for show notes, links, and past episodes. Right here, right now, it is my great pleasure to share with you my chat with novelist, poet, painter, and songwriter Wayne Saalman on his latest book, The Journey Across Forever. For those of you new to Wayne, his first two books were published with New Falcon with extensive introductions by Bob Wilson. Wayne Saalman, welcome to Hilaritas podcast.
Thank you very much. Lovely to be here.
Yeah. I was excited to talk to you. I recognized your name. You have a new book out that we'll get to in a minute here. But you wrote a couple books for New Falcon back in the height of, was it in the 80s?
Yes, The Dream Illuminati came out in 1988, and The Illuminati of Immortality, a follow-up novel, in 1992, actually.
92, okay.
Yeah.
And you, I don't know what to say, got your foot in the door with New Falcon because you won a contest of sorts. Can you say more about that?
Well, only 1 year, Dr. Christopher S. Hyatt was the owner and publisher of Falcon Press. And 1 year he put in an ad in a certain book about, a publisher's guide, you might say. And he received hundreds of solicited manuscripts, and he said they were piled from the floor to the ceiling. But I was just lucky in the fact that when he read mine, he liked it, and he got excited about it. And it was called Vimana originally, and was about sort of touched on flying dreams and the Vimanas of India that go back to the writings of Bhagavad Gita and that era, with these flying machines, very strange flying machines in India, in 2000 BC. And so he liked the story, and he published it, and we changed the name over time. It became The Dream Illuminati, which the Illuminati side of it was at the influence of Robert Anton Wilson, who in his book Cosmic Trigger had talked about the Illuminati and had me intrigued with that notion.
And so Bob wrote a pretty extensive foreword for that book, if I remember.
He did, yeah. He wrote a great introduction, and he also wrote an extensive introduction to the Illuminati of Immortality. So I was very lucky there.
And he was a big influence on you. Can you say a little bit more about that? How did you discover Bob Wilson?
I had a friend that I met when I was on the road traveling. His name was Lauren Bowker, and he was just the right person at the right time. Sometimes we get lucky, we meet somebody. He was a huge fan of the beat writers, Jack Kerouac and Ginsberg and Burroughs and all those guys. And he also was a fan of Robert Anton Wilson. So he introduced me to Robert Anton Wilson and to Buddhism in general. At that point, I knew nothing about Buddhism, or just very little. And so when I read Cosmic Trigger by Robert Anton Wilson, it just really inspired me so much. It's just it was life altering, is the only way I can put it.
Right book at the right time.
Yeah. Well, his notion of syncretism was something I had never heard of. And he talked about syncretism, which is where you draw from the wisdom traditions, the spiritual traditions from all around the globe. And you basically, what do you resonate with when you read or hear about these various ideas? And Wilson said, it's a great way to create your own personal viewpoint, on these very fundamental metaphysical matters. And he also, in that book, Cosmic Trigger, talked about being an agnostic mystic. So, we think of, we certainly at the time, I was thinking a mystic is somebody who has these great visions of God directly, or some kind of divine vision that then you know all the answers, and it's a great notion, but who knows all the answers? Even a mystic is still caught up in a great mystery, and so agnostic, it's an acceptable thing to say, I don't know. I only know so much. This is what I do know, but this is what I don't know. And to be upfront and honest about it. Like, nobody has all of the answers. And, for thousands of years, humanity has been trying to determine how we came to be and how this universe came to be and so forth. And, physics is making its contribution, but spirituality, the religious viewpoint, has certainly made its contribution. So I believe in being holistic about it and taking from all of these sources. So that's syncretism.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. I had to look that one up myself when I was reading your work, and the words that came up for me as you were talking were design your own religion.
Yeah.
But the other thing you touched into the I don't know, the mystery, and I wrote in my notes, and I don't know if this came from you because it was kind of a jumble of notes, but I'll throw it out there, see if you recognize it. Ultimate reality is a mystery for a reason.
Yeah, well, I do have a chapter in The Journey Across Forever about that maybe life is strange for a reason, and that is
Mm.
to compel us or to inspire us to seek answers. If everything was just totally and completely obvious, we wouldn't seek these kinds of mysteries or pursue them. So I think I called the chapter a reality being stranger than we think for a reason. And John Alexander, who wrote the introduction, or the foreword to The Journey Across Forever, um, some viewers may be familiar with Colonel Alexander, but he's written books like on UFOs and paranormal experiences and so forth. And he has a law that basically, every time we think we have everything figured out, something else comes along to alter the whole paradigm. So we're
Mm.
constantly evolving because of it. And
Mm.
life, he says, is much more complicated and complex than we ever imagined. And UFOs, among other paranormal phenomena, certainly show us that, because we're in the midst of a great mystery here, and we can lament that, or we can be inspired by it. So my whole thing in the Journey Across Forever is to try to inspire people and say it's this way for a reason.
Mm.
This is how we spiritually evolve. Otherwise, we would just be robots or whatever. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So the Journey Across Forever is your new book, and we'll continue to dig into that. Um, Boy, what hit me there? Just the idea that just when we get things have things figured out. It kind of we get the rug pull on us.
Yeah.
Um, Before you said that, my mind was like, well, the more we find out through scientific discoveries, it often leads to just more questions. So it's almost like there's this never-ending sense of mystery and unknown. But this idea that once we do think we get things figured out, and then we get a total rug pull, I like that as well. That really resonates with me. Our listeners are probably tired of me talking about the Grateful Dead, but I was a big fan back in the early 90s. And it was one of those things, especially as they were getting older, as human, they were improvisational. But as you get older and as you so on and so forth, you just fall into patterns because you're human as well. And so
Yes,
just when you
yes.
think you got the band figured out, they would do something completely unexpected and you would just mind blown.
Yeah. Well, that was the beauty of the Beatles, is that they were constantly recreating themselves or reinventing themselves over their
Ah,
careers. And Dylan the same. Now there are chapters I just mentioned in the Journey Across Forever. There's entire chapter on the Beatles, their influence on me and world culture, and the same for Dylan, the influence on me and on world culture, because
okay.
these figures are titanic, absolutely so creative and original and so forth. Great inspiration.
Mm, I want to dig into that further. I have to confess, as a music fan, that the Beatles and Dylan have never quite struck a chord with me. But
Yeah.
I love Dylan's songwriting, but I haven't really tuned into their music. But so Journey Across Forever is the new book. Uh, what's the headline of this book? You've talked about a little bit, but
It's I subtitled it A Magical Provocative Odyssey Across the Ages, Around the World,
mm,
and Into the Great Beyond. So that kind of sums up. So we talk at length about sort of looking at the history of humanity and saying, why on earth were we so aggressive and violent with each other? Why were there all these
mm,
wars and such? It's and then at the same time we're creating religions that then get at loggerheads with each other. The Crusades, the Holy Inquisition, uh, very, very distorted ways of looking at spirituality, to have killing involved, and of course the jihadists today and so forth. So I touch on that, but and I don't want to bring anybody down by, I didn't want to overdo that side of it, but it's part of our reality. We have to face it. And we have to say, look, this is medieval thinking. It's time to move on. So I tried to carry the whole thing into the 21st century, and I have traveled the world. So when I say a magical, provocative odyssey around the world, there are scenes in Cairo and the Great Pyramid, and in India at the
mm.
temples, the sacred temples on the Ganges. And I found a Power Stone in Australia, and I tell the story about that, which we might get into a little later. So I have traveled the world. I started traveling at a very young age. The late 60s, early 70s was a time when a lot of young people were hitting the road, as they say. I mentioned about reading Jack Kerouac's On the Road. That really got me super excited. And my friend and I, we traveled up to Alaska, to Kodiak Island, and all through British Columbia, the Yukon. So a lot of road trips, but a lot of flights across Europe, across Asia, lived in Australia for a time. And then when I mention about the great beyond, there are numerous chapters on the afterlife in this book. And what I think the near death returnees say about the afterlife is actually a new spiritual paradigm for humanity. So I think it's absolutely crucial that we listen to what they say, because we have tens of thousands of reports by now by people who, thanks to modern day resuscitation methods, have been to the other side and back. And it's really amazing how much there is unanimity in the things they say about, say, that they travel through the tunnel and arrive in this paradise-like place and have they meet loved ones, they meet beings of light, and they have a life review, which is absolutely very, very important to the spiritual paradigm that I write about.
Yeah, I want to slow this down a little bit, because this particular subject I found the most fascinating out of everything. So you go through the tunnel, you meet various loved ones and perhaps family and friends, and there's a life review. Can you say, well, maybe back up. So, and beings of light that are assisting this process, is that correct?
Yeah, the beings of light are fascinating all in themselves. They seem to radiate such love and security to the soul that has passed over. And there's this feeling that you are loved, and they can communicate with us telepathically, which is interesting. They don't say, hello, I'm Gabriel or Michael the Archangel. They don't give their names, because the resonance of their energetic being is what envelops the soul that's there. And somehow they communicate truth to us, true facts or true knowledge, via a telepathic method we don't understand, but almost invariably everyone says that's the way it happens. And there was a very fascinating, I write about my favorite near-death returnee story by a man named Mellon Thomas, I think it is. But he says, he was entering this realm and the being of light appeared and he felt all this love and so forth. But he said, wait a minute, hold on here. Can we pause just a moment? I have some questions. And he said, to his surprise, everything paused as requested. And he said, thank you. I have some questions I'd like to ask. And the really important information he shared with us is that basically no religion is the religion that these beings are a part of or subscribe to. No religion stands out above any other. Everybody is equal, whether you are an atheist or madly into whatever religion, that you happen to be while on earth. But, the love is there. It doesn't matter. And it's very important that you understand, as this is what he learned from it, that whatever religion you're familiar with from your time on earth, you're going to kind of get a feedback loop of that information. So, you might see, he saw Jesus, he saw Krishna, he saw Buddha, he saw mandalas, he saw sacred symbols, and the whole thing just kept like, running through all these images. And he understood that you get a feedback loop of whatever images you're most comfortable with. And it seems that in that initial phase of crossing over into the great beyond, we're given familiarity, where we see landscapes that we're used to here on Earth. So the whole idea of familiarity is very important, because then we're comfortable. and we relax
Mm.
into it, and we realize everything's okay. I'm not in hell or going to be punished here and so forth. And sorry,
Mm.
then we have the life review, which
Right.
I write about in the book as being the ultimate karmic moment.
Mm.
So everything that we have seen and felt during the course of our lives, we see all of that again. So we see our lives again, we feel everything we felt, but more
Yeah.
importantly, we feel what we made others feel, how we made others feel. And this is where I say the ultimate karmic moment occurs. So if you were cruel, if you were physically cruel or psychologically cruel, that is going to come back to you not only in full, but magnified, intensified, according to these near-death returnees. Some have said that, whatever their transgressions, it was absolutely excruciating
Ooh.
to re-experience or to experience what they made other people feel. So this is really, really crucial to come to grips with here and now while we're in this life, because then we can alter our behavior and say, you know what? Karma is real. What we do to others does come back to us. And if you want a happy future, if you want a bright and beautiful future, then you just sow the proper seeds. We reap what we sow. And we have the free will, but our actions have consequences. So we learn to adapt our karma to positive behaviors that will come back to us and help to bring us to what I think is a paradise beyond.
Ooh. Before we go there to paradise, I want to hang out on this life review for a minute longer. Um, yeah, so there's this certain sense of with freedom comes responsibility. I mean, I can show up how I want as a human being, but at the end of the day, in my life review, I'm going to own that responsibility of how I showed up, maybe I could say.
Exactly.
And maybe this is part of my background as a psychotherapist, but there's something about developing a capacity to feel more that comes up for me. If this life review is about feeling everything we've already felt and feeling everything we've made others felt, and I guess I'm just saying, is this like a test? And the more I can hold that space, so to speak, of feeling all those things, the more I will pass on to the next reincarnation a little differently. I'm just making things up here, but does that resonate
Yes.
with you at all?
Well, I know what you're saying, but we're testing ourselves, I think, is the
Okay.
crucial thing there to understand. God doesn't stand over us and judge us. Even the being of light apparently doesn't stand over us and judge
Uh,
us. We judge ourselves, and the whole thing is it's a learning process. And it's like there are often people say they were asked, like, well, what could you have done differently there? Nobody is punished or condemned for uh, the things they've done unless it gets into really evil territory, which apparently, just to put this little note in, those of such a profoundly evil nature are apparently spirited away elsewhere. Nobody has ever come back from that to say what those people experience. So the
mhm.
Hitlers and the Stalins and the murderers and the really vicious people are just spirited away somewhere. But most of us, of course, are just typical human beings who try to do good, and we are selfish sometimes, or we have small transgressions and so forth, and we hurt people's feelings. And we say things we wish we wouldn't have said, or we try to take advantage of people and maybe get the bigger piece of the pie for ourselves and so forth. So these kind of things, you do become more sensitive if you pursue this as a spiritual path to all your behaviors, and if you become what I say is hyper vigilant. This is mindfulness at its absolute best, where every thought, word, and deed is really thought about as you're experiencing the moment. So we all have thoughts that might pop into our head that are not exactly noble, shall we say, but you can immediately say, well, I'm not going to feed energy to that thought. That one's out. But another one pops in, you go, yes, I like this, I'll go with this. And then you speak. And then you start take whatever action. Karma means action. So whatever action you're taking is going to ultimately, you're putting out into the world energy that is going to eventually come back to you in some form, not necessarily exactly in the same way, but overall, we will experience a rebalancing of those energies in the life review that I was speaking about here.
Yeah. Well, the big takeaway I got, the main one I got there is that I think your phrase was, we test ourselves.
Yeah.
And that it's really, it all comes down to us in a way. And there's something about having these conscious, intentional acts with the knowledge of how we show up is going to come back to us in the end.
Yeah, I think it's important to this notion that has been around for centuries, if not millenniums, that God is watching you and judging you and is going to punish you if you didn't follow his commandments and so forth. That's not really the way it is. It's where you're being asked to look at your behavior and say, and it's a very loving thing, these beings of light. It's like, well, what could you have done better there? It's easy to think of them as angels. It's no problem thinking of them as angels. And so it's a beautiful experience, but it can be made all the more beautiful and intense if we sow the right seeds here and now. So it is important to live it here and now. It's not just about once we leave this planet, So the book is very heavy on that side of things, philosophically, you might say. So yeah, that's that side of it, into the great beyond.
And right, and so that would be my next question. You touched on it, and it's, so we go through this life review, and we have to experience all this, and then what's next?
That is interesting to consider, but it's purely speculative, right?
Okay.
Yeah, of course, yogis for thousands of years have said that you can move up to higher planes of existence. So even in the Western world, if you study the religious traditions and spiritual traditions, they talked about the seven heavens. And again, you're able to rise up to better, well, let's say more blissful forms of existence. But if you haven't fully learned your lessons, we come back to the earth, or a place like the earth. And again, now this is interesting. If you really study this, you find out that we make the choice to come to earth, probably most likely to learn specific spiritual lessons. And if we didn't do well, let's say if we were selfish, then we need to be in a situation where we must give of ourselves and redress that selfishness.
Mm,
So apparently we have soul groups in
mm,
the other realm, and uh, 10, 15 souls that are we're constantly sort of recycling through reincarnation with, and helping one another and choosing roles, choosing the body we inhabit and the culture that we will be a part of and so forth. So that's everything seems to be about choice. And even strangely enough, even in the UFO literature today, where a lot of people have been abducted, or some have been abducted, and they would say afterwards, under hypnosis, that they had actually chosen to have such an experience before coming to
mm.
Earth. So that's kind of a mind-blowing notion. And I'm not saying that it's, that I know that that's absolutely true, but it is interesting to think that we choose everything that basically happens to us, but we do have free will at the same time to deal with it, to
Mm.
react to events.
So free will then being the choice on how we respond to the event.
Exactly. Yes.
And I might add, I guess there's a kind of a habitual response, and free will would be the choice to show up differently.
Yeah, like we're very much indoctrinated into a culture, or you could say we're acculturated from a young age, and this is fine. This is the way it has to be. We have amnesia about the other world, and that's part of the design, apparently. And we're indoctrinated into a culture, and we soon gain habitual ways of looking at the world and thinking about the world. The paradigm that we grew up with becomes, for many, a lifelong way of looking at life that never changes. But I think, and I write about this in The Journey Across Forever, that spiritual liberation is a way to break through social conditioning.
Mm.
And Robert Anton Wilson was fantastic at writing about that sort of thing, and talking about reality tunnels and how we get so into seeing things a certain way. And he would talk about all the various possibilities that are there, and he is the one who opened my mind to the idea of multidimensional reality,
Mm.
and that we're not just in one groove and have to stay there for the remainder of our lives. We can break through, we can throw off the chains, the veils, or break through the veils of illusion and so forth.
Right, right.
And that's spiritual liberation, in that then you can think for yourself and
Mm.
decide what you want to believe.
Nice. Well, I don't know if this is a shift of gears or not, but I want to guide us into, you mentioned alien or UFO abductions. And I have to admit, I've never really gotten too into this subject, and I've always kind of lumped aliens and UFOs in one group, and now I'm starting to want just in one like category in my head here, and I'm uh, starting to separate them a little bit more. Maybe you can talk first about aliens.
Well, the one of the chapters in the book is called Close Encounter with Jim Mars, who was the author of it was called Alien Agenda, or is called Alien Agenda. And that book is apparently the best-selling book on UFOs of all time. And Jim Mars has been on the program Ancient Aliens and so forth. Well, I met Jim in Aurora, Texas, where a craft of some kind apparently smashed into a windmill in 1897. And it was written about in the Dallas newspaper. And the thing that I mainly learned from Jim's book, he had great bits about remote viewing in it, by the way, but really captivating ideas of what the remote viewers have seen and what they think. But the thing I write about in this particular chapter is how he broadly divides the alien presence into three categories. There are the Nordic humanoids, and then there's the Greys that Whitley Strieber made famous. And then there are what he called the Transcendentals. Now, I postulate that the Transcendentals are probably those we have called angels over the years, over the centuries and millenniums. And possibly the Greys are the demons, because all through history, we see evidence that some strange beings have appeared time and again, and they're not human. Like they can appear and disappear. Like even the fairies were said to be able to appear and disappear. So there's the lore of the gentry and the jinn and all these, right around the globe, these different beings. I myself have seen what I believe were Nordic humanoids. And I tell this story in the book where my brother and I were in front of our home. I was around 10 or 11, my brother a couple years older. We were throwing a baseball back and forth in the front yard. This was in Ohio. And it was a perfect sunny summer day, not a cloud in the sky. And we were in the front yard, as I say, when from the back, this round silver craft came flying over the house. And it was so low in the sky that I almost could have hit it with a baseball. And I note that it was not like a typical flying saucer, but it had this shape, the round shape and the flatness. No sound. You didn't hear any kind of engine or anything or motor. But it had this, it was a flat shuttlecraft-like thing that had a railing around it. And there were two beings standing at the back of this railing. And this handsome couple, a man and a woman, they looked very human. So that's why I think they were humanoid, because we've never seen such a craft again, and nobody has pictures of such craft anywhere. But my brother and I, we waved up at them, and they waved down at us. And there's just this beautiful scene where, this really newfangled, strange, exotic craft came flying over. And like their hair wasn't even blowing about, which made me think that they were in some kind of magnetic field of some kind. But we ran in to get our mother, and we called her out, and she came out, and she could see it in the distance that was flying on. But, at that time, I didn't realize what I was experiencing. But maybe 10 years later, I thought, wait a minute, what was that? And my brother and I were equally intrigued and wondering, what did we see that day, And then I started reading all this UFO literature to try to find out what I had seen. And I've only ever found one account that's similar in Boei, I don't know if I pronounce this correctly, but it's in Papua New Guinea. And there was this priest who had a mission there, and this round craft floated above their village. And I think it was the priest and maybe 30 native peoples. And again, there was a railing around the top of the craft, and they waved at the beings there, and the beings waved at them. Jacques Vallée tells that story in one of
Okay.
his books. So that was the first experience, and there was another night then 3 or 4 years later where it was a summer night again, and all the stars were out and everything, and this oblong craft came flying toward us in silence, and no lights hardly at all, but the top of it was a little bit lit up. And I was walking with a friend across the field, and we were going to his place. It was completely dark, but we could see this craft, and we thought, what is that? And we were puzzled, and then we both simultaneously had this feeling that it had seen us, which you hear about that in the UFO literature, where the thing becomes aware of you. And it startles you, you know, suddenly, like, this thing knows I'm here looking at it. And then the strangest thing happened. The top of the deck burst into flames, crackling flames. The thing was so low in the sky, we could hear the flames. And this was after it kind of turned and was following us. So we were running at that point, and then the thing broke into these flames on top, and then in a few seconds later it was just like snuffed out, and then the craft just floated on, and it had turned direction completely at a right angle, and the smoke was trailing behind it, and it just floated off into the night. So it was one of those really peculiar
Yeah.
things that sometimes get associated with UFOs and the paranormal. And kind of Colonel Alexander's notion there that you think you have something figured out, you're like, what is this? This is really puzzling. So that was my, I've seen lights up in the sky that have circled around and this sort of thing, but those were my close encounters, shall we say.
Goodness. So the second one did not involve any alien presences, just a UFO
Yeah,
sort.
we couldn't see anybody.
Gotcha.
No.
And
Yeah.
and the first one, the Nordics, are those, they're humanoids? What? Well, gosh, so many directions to go here. I guess what strikes me about your first one and maybe your second one, well, is they were just feel like they were so concrete and tangible. Like these were not non-ordinary experiences other than obviously what you're witnessing, but it
Yeah.
wasn't like you were in an altered or non-ordinary state of consciousness yourself.
Right.
It
And
sounds
we were
very
very
lucid.
young, so this was all before any
Yeah,
of that kind of stuff was even
right.
thought of. You know,
Yeah, and
this was in the 60s, when I was still too young to be a part of the the love generation, all that stuff going on.
sure.
That influence came later.
Obviously those substances could make a huge difference, but even
Yeah.
just sometimes we can just find ourselves in a I don't know, I guess I just assume when a UFO shows up we might find ourselves in a non-ordinary state of consciousness, whether we like it or not, or just so paradigm shattering we might.
Well, the Navy videos, that have emerged about the TikTok,
Mm-hmm.
that I mean, those men are military men, and
Yeah,
they're using all the latest gadgetry to film it, and to the radar and everything like that. And there does seem to be a concrete presence of some kind, but at the same time, they can, soar off at 8,000 miles an hour in an absolute instant, or
right.
cover 60 miles in 6 seconds or something like that. And it's like, how can this possibly be an object that's, subject to the laws of physics as we know them?
Right. Yes. So and that makes sense to me in a way because in my mind, it's a long distance to somewhere else in in the galaxy
Yeah,
and so my assumption is they have developed ways to travel that go beyond normal space time and just hitting the thrusters.
yeah.
But
Warp
who
speed.
right, right. Um, so what's your sense of what's going on here? It seems like we're having more and more sightings lately. You know,
Yeah,
sometimes we
and
seem to relate these occurrences to like the more planetary stress. So like during, the nuclear weapons threats, we might have more sightings in the 80s and then that subsided. Now we're just kind of in
yeah,
a geopolitical instability and now we're having more sightings. What do you think?
I think we are reaching a point where basically everyone's going to kind of realize that this is a real phenomenon. We're having congressional meetings. The famous New York Times, article about uh, Luis Elizondo, who resigned from a Pentagon program. And this was December 2017. That to me was the moment that I think when everything changed, because this was published, in the New York Times and
Mm-hmm.
elsewhere. And it admitted that the Pentagon had this, $1 million program going, had been going for some time. Elizondo was frustrated that there were people, the higher brass weren't admitting publicly that UAPs, as they were calling them then, unidentified aerial phenomena, were real. And but this basically said, this was the moment of disclosure where they're saying, but they are real. They're real, but we don't know what they are. Now, the military doesn't want to admit they don't know how to deal with these objects, or they can't say where they come from, or why they're here, or how they do what they do. It's all of that is a total mystery.
Yeah.
And like Jacques Vallée, he would say, we've been sort of led down a very, very long, winding trail with little clues along the way, experiences along the way. And this second sighting of mine, there was an absurd element to it, but he thinks that is so that, people will be able to say, oh, that's not true. That can't be true. That's bull. Whereas another would say, no, no, I get it. I get it. That's probably real. So it leaves it ambiguous.
Right.
And so it's been ambiguous like that for ages, millenniums, really. And, for me, like when I visited the Great Pyramid in Egypt, or something like the Trilithon blocks of stone in Baalbek, are, they're indicative of the fact that here's the Trilithon blocks are 3 blocks of granite weighing over 100 tons.
Mm.
These were quarried, carried up a hill, and placed on top of other giant boulders that had also been carved and shaped. And it's like, we can't do it today. And of course, in South America, there are all these walls that have these stones, giant tonnage, stones cut to perfection and put together. You can't even slip a piece of paper between the cracks. So we can't do that today. How did they do that? All those centuries ago, with ropes and copper tools? I don't think so. So something real has been going on, but they've, for some reason, our friends, our visitors, our allies, whatever they are, have taken a very, very long time to bring us even to this point. But I think
Mm,
we are reaching a tipping point. And with congressional hearings and people at high levels in government admitting they do believe that these UAPs are for real, but that we don't know exactly,
right.
where they come from or how they do what they do. So the young people today, I find, they all believe that there's more life in the universe than just us, and it just seems obvious now in retrospect, doesn't it, that the universe has to be full of life, but
Sure.
it's also seemingly multidimensional. And the current thinking, like with Colonel Alexander and Jacques Vallée, uh, the preponderance seems to be that these are interdimensional beings of some type who have that capability of manifesting in our particular dimension, but can also disappear from it,
Mm.
which just makes no sense to us at all. There's a famous UFO case where a jet fighter went chasing after the UFO and it disappeared in front of the pilot. And the next thing he knew, in an instant, the thing was following him. How is that possible? It's impossible to, according to the laws of physics as we know them. So you can really, I think, speculate and really up the ante on the whole idea of the multidimensionality of our existence.
So maybe that's the point to take here, because what I'm getting is that we're coming to a point of what I might call cultural acceptance, where we're starting to all kind of agree this is a thing, and at the same time we have no idea what the heck they're up to and why and how and all that jazz. Um, but you just made that last point, and I think it we slipped my mind. But that I think that was, do you
Yeah.
remember
Um,
what just the
they
acceptance
could
of
be,
multidimensionality, like
it
that?
seems that they want us to lead us to evolve uh, our thinking to include them, or to realize that just the basic a materialist paradigm is not all there is. There is more to it. And Whitley Strieber, who endorsed the book The Journey Across Forever, he has a new book out at this point called Them, and he talks, he's trying to figure that out as well. And he says in it that he said the abduction phenomenon seems to have receded and is no longer occurring. So
Mm,
it's like there are waves of activity. There was a point at which UFOs were hovering over nuclear missile facilities. And a very famous case in Malmstrom where they turned off like 10 nuclear missiles. They just shut them down one after the next. And then when everybody, all the technicians were like going crazy, like, what is going on here? One by one, they came back online.
wow.
And almost, I don't know, of course, there's the Rendlesham Forest case and so forth. So there's just so many documented cases where UFOs have interacted with military sites. And so, what's next? Who knows?
Yeah.
But like so many movies are also kind of working strategically to get everyone to understand that the phenomenon is real. Um,
Yeah, I
and
think, go ahead.
the young, well, just to say, as I said before, like the young are really Like to them, this is just as normal as a cell phone. Like this is part of reality today, and they
Right.
don't even question it. Which means a whole new paradigm has been achieved.
True. So yeah, sort of a new paradigm of acceptance that this is out there. We don't exactly know why, but maybe part of their function is to open us up to reality beyond mundane materialist space time as we know it, and to other multi dimensions to be
Absolutely.
defined as we
That's
go along.
perfectly stated right there. That's
Goodness.
excellent
Thank
insight.
you. All right. Wow.
Now, if I may,
Oh, please.
I'd like to tell the story about the Power Stone I found in Australia because it involved a non-human entity that to me proved that there are non-human entities, shall we say.
Yeah, let's
So
hear that.
I was living in Australia in the late 70s, and I'd been on holiday or a vacation, uh, living in Melbourne, went to Perth, which is a huge distance, like from New Orleans to LA, something like that. So it's a huge distance on the road. And, had a couple weeks out in the Perth area and so forth, and then heading back. Long road trip. So at one point, I knew I had a whole nother day to go before getting back to Melbourne. Getting tired of being on the road. So at random, totally at random, saw this dirt road down to the ocean and got off the highway, went down to the ocean, set up the tent for the night. This was early mid-afternoon, though, taking the afternoon off type thing. Well, I went exploring. I love rocks and shells and things like that. And I'm always exploring and looking for these things just for fun. But I noticed there was a cave at the water's edge, and the tide was out. So I had to get down on my knees and look in. But when I looked inside the cave, I could see sunlight.
Hmm.
So I was a bit baffled by this, but then I quickly realized, okay, when the tide is high, this is probably a blowhole inside this particular cavern. It was small enough, but still sizable at the same time. So intrigued, I crawled into this little space, this little cave, and in the midst of the sunlight was a long oblong or an oblong stone of some kind with crisscrossing bands on it. So
Hmm.
it seemed like, I don't know if it was sandstone or granite or a combination or what it was exactly, but it was a really cool stone, about as long as my forearm. And I assumed it had been rolled in the surf for countless centuries, is why it looked the way it looked. And somehow the striations, the crisscrossing bands were probably, from sediments that settled millions of years ago. Anyway, I took the stone from the cave and spent the night there. And the next day, back in Melbourne, I unloaded the car, took things into the house, and had some things, including this particular stone, on the bedroom floor. So I just set them out. I took a shower. I sat back on the bed to just read and relax. I picked up Gary Snyder's Turtle Island book of poetry, and I was reading that. And so this was early enough in the day. There was still daylight out there, but I had the light on in the bedroom. And there was this overhead light that was hanging from the middle of the room with a green Chinese lantern shade on it. So I was reading and relaxing, as I say, and I happened to look up at one point, and I noticed there was a mist all around this green Chinese lantern. It was very, very visible.
Hmm.
Now I thought, is this smoke? At first I had a little bit of a panic, and
Mm.
but a bit of investigation. No, there's no smoke here. There's no smell of smoke. There's no reason why there would be smoke. And but the whole top of the room was full of mist. And then I noticed there's this old black Victorian fireplace in the room. And over by the fireplace across the room, I could see a large spiral spinning in the midst of the mist.
Mm.
And the spiral was large. It was maybe, half my size, like my upper torso, like that large. And it was just spinning there in the mist. Now, if the mist hadn't been there, I wouldn't have been able to see this at all. There was a clock by the bed, and I noticed the time. I also played with the lights to make sure I wasn't fooling myself or hallucinating or something. But the spiral stayed there. And for a whole solid hour, I was thinking, I sensed some kind of intelligence here. And I was kind of talking quietly to this spiral of energy. And at one point, the spiral came toward me and it entered me and it swirled around inside me like it was checking me out. And then it just backed up and went right back to the same place. So, like I say, for over an hour, this went on. And then somebody started a car outside the house. And it seemed like that altered the dynamic of the situation. And this spiral started crackling and it shot up through the ceiling and disappeared. And in an absolute instant, so did the mist. The mist just totally cleared out. Well, a few days later, this Australian couple came over and I was showing them things, and they saw this rock and they said, I think you've got an Aboriginal artifact here. It's illegal to take one of these from wherever they happen to be. So I was a bit, concerned at that point. But it really then struck me, wow, this does seem to be some kind of special artifact of some kind. So about a week later, I happened to be out shopping, and I went into this one particular store where Aborigine things were being sold, didgeridoos and spear throwers and boomerangs, all that kind of stuff, but a lot of Aborigine art and so forth as well. And there was a woman there, an Aborigine woman, and I just thought, I'm going to ask her what she thinks. So I did ask her, and she was very nice about it. I explained that I may have inadvertently taken an Aboriginal artifact. And she said, well, I have a friend who is a professor at the university, and he knows all about these kinds of things. So why don't you bring me the stone and I'll take it to him and we'll find out. So that's what I did. And a few days after I gave her the stone, I got this phone call from her, and she was a bit full of apologies about, I had to give the stone away. I had to give it away. And I said, well, what happened? She said her friend, the professor, had determined it was indeed an Aborigine artifact. In fact, it was a power stone, she said. It was a chiringa. And a Dreamtime entity was probably living in that stone. So suddenly things all added up, the spiral in the mist and all this. So she said, I had to give it to them. They flew 2 Aborigine shaman from South Australia, where I had gotten the stone, to Melbourne to collect the stone. And she said to them, it's not mine to give you. And they said, you give us the stone or we point the bone at you. And this, to Aborigines, is a death sentence. So
Mm.
this was serious, serious business to them. They had flown these people to collect that stone. That's how important it was to them. But it finally made sense what had happened and about the spiral. And I realized this was a Dreamtime entity, a non-human entity. There was intelligence there. It had come toward me, had entered me, had checked me out, had backed up to the same place, and so forth. So I'm convinced in retrospect that this was a Dreamtime entity. And, subsequent research, I found out that there are all these spirals pecked into stones all over Australia. They're
Mm.
called petroglyphs. And they do, believe that we humans come from the Dreamtime and we return to it. And they generally characterize these Dreamtime entities as ancestors. So,
Mm.
whether they are all were all once human and then return to the dream time and be entered just an energetic state, a non-physical state, or whether they never were, I don't know, but very intriguing, and to me was proof that there are non-human entities. And to me it bolsters the whole idea of the afterlife, that perhaps this is our true form as well, in this spiraling ball of energy. It makes sense in a certain way. So I think it's an intriguing thought. And I write
Yeah.
about that in the book as well.
Okay. Wow.
And I might just add, here in Ireland, where I now live, there's a place called Newgrange, which is their most famous megalithic site. Newgrange is said to be over 5,000 years old, so they claim it's even older than the pyramids. But what is at the opening of that particular site? Spirals on stone. And when you enter the chamber, which the light from the winter solstice will enter that every year on December 22nd.
Hmm.
But it lights up the inner chamber, and there's a very, very famous triple spiral carved into the wall there. And the Celtic tradition is very reverent in terms of the spiral as a sacred symbol. And perhaps this is the reason, because this is this is the true shape of our being.
Mm.
So it's actually petroglyphs of spirals all over the earth. Native Americans also have spirals in,
Okay.
petroglyphs.
Spiral is a prominent symbol with Hilaritas Press now.
Oh, yes,
Bob Wilson had a spiral ring,
yes,
and
he
you can actually
absolutely.
buy, yeah, reproductions of that now. Interesting. So I haven't thought much about the spiral, but that's I don't even know what to say there. Soaking that one in. Well,
Well, it's
shift.
one of the stories, in the book, and I think the book covers a lot of territory, but I think as multidimensional beings, we have a lot of different facets to ourselves, and we have all these interests and intrigues. And for me, this is like a lifetime of experience, which, the people I've met and the things I've learned and so forth. And I try to bring it all together in a synthesized way, in a comprehensive but entertaining way,
Yeah.
uh, with the book. And it's exciting. Robert Anton Wilson inspired me, as did Timothy Leary, and he and Timothy Leary were great friends.
Mm.
And the Cosmic Trigger is at least a third of the book is about Timothy Leary. So I was with Falcon Press, and like I was lucky in that when my first book, The Dream Illuminati, came out in 1988, we went to the LA book fair, and Timothy Leary was there, and I got to spend 3 days with him, and he was fascinating as usual, very
Yeah.
entertaining. He ran off at one point to get William Gibson, who had written Neuromancer and was famous for Neuromancer, and the whole cyberspace thing was just brand new at that
Mm.
point. Gibson came over to our booth and spent time with us, and so I'm very lucky in many ways of the experiences I've had and the people I've met and the things I've learned, but I've had an insatiable appetite to read. And so I try to just bring all that knowledge and insight into the book. And that's what the Journey Across Forever is about.
And the book covers, as we've covered today, so many different things. We've just touched on them. What is there a prescription to be found in there? What's the action items? I hate to say
Well,
that.
I think to sum it up, kind of, I'm trying to inspire people to find the miraculous in the mundane
Mm,
and the sacred in the profane. People
beautiful.
tend to divide life, into categories, and they think the profane world is maybe a bit evil or horrible or something, but this is where we learn our spiritual lessons. So to find the sacred in the profane is crucial, I think, to becoming enlightened and to evolving spiritually. We have to not reject things, but accept that the reality is a multidimensional thing that includes everything. Like, you cannot exclude anything
Mm,
from the most profane that you can imagine to the most sacred. But we tend to just divide everything out, and oh, maybe I'll go to church on Sunday and pay a little heed to my spiritual side, but that's not going to get you anywhere, really. Like, if you really
mm,
want to evolve spiritually and you want to become enlightened, you have to make it part of your everyday activities and thoughts and so forth. So,
yeah.
yeah, to meditate, I would recommend every day, even if you're just sitting doing nothing for 15 minutes in the morning, but just to find your own way of being comfortable. You don't have to have any fancy yoga postures or anything, but just to let the mind just settle down, and to understand that in silence, there's great power, and often beautiful insights will just spring into the mind. But you have to let all the distractions, you have to turn off the phone and the TV and the radio and everything. And what I do is I get up first thing in the morning before everyone else in my household, and I just sit, and I don't make it a big deal that I'm meditating. Just sit and let everything be still. You're coming out of your dreams. There's a lot in the book on dreams, dream yoga. And as you know, I've written the books about the Dream Illuminati, and those plots are about living our dreams. And for many of us, we find ourselves flying in our dreams, which is interesting. Are we having out of body experiences? But I started at a very young age having these flying dreams, and I would get a little higher with each dream in the sky. Sometimes I was barely off the ground.
Mm,
Then I would get over like the electric wires, and eventually, as the years went on, I eventually burst into outer space. Literally, it was just amazing
mm,
uh, to burst through into outer space.
Mm.
And I just think there's great power in that. And a lot of people have these flying dreams. So that inspired me to write the Dream Illuminati. And, what if we had jetpacks, personal jetpacks,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
could live our flying dreams?
Mm.
So of course, our whole religious upbringing in the West is tied into the idea of angels that can fly, that Jesus rose into heaven, bodily into heaven. There's levitating saints and yogis in the world. So you start studying the occult and you find out about these kinds of things. It just really is intriguing, and inspiring, and broadens us, expands us. And I think that's what we want to do. We just want to keep expanding as people. And,
Mm.
we have to take our own spiritual evolution into our own hands. It's nobody else is going to do it for us. You must do it yourself, and you can't count on anybody else to do it for you. And so spiritual liberation is a way, it's a method of moving away from organized religion and doing your own thing and finding out what you think. That's what syncretism is about. And, I've studied Buddhism and Hinduism in great detail, and the Western traditions. Secret societies have all kinds of interesting insights into what life is really all about. And, you can find these answers if you go searching for them. But if you don't search for them, you're not going to find them. And nobody can just tell you it's like this or that. You must have actual life experience of things in order to grow in wisdom.
Mm. Mm. I like that last one. So I want to circle back to what you said at the beginning, and finding the sacred in the mundane. And as you're talking, what struck me is creating heaven on earth, and that's a state of mind. And then if I take what you said at the end here, taking it into our own hands, we talked about taking responsibility for ourselves. So it's our job to create a more positive paradigm in our own head of turning the sacred into turning the mundane into the sacred, or looking at the mundane with a paradigm of the sacredness, maybe, and to grow through having experiences. That's
Yeah, it's vital. It's absolutely vital to have life experience to gain wisdom, because you
yes.
can things can't just be intellectual. And also we have to open the heart if we really want to be spiritual beings, and to acknowledge our spirituality, because empathy and compassion are crucial elements to spirituality. And the more sensitive you become to the idea of spirituality, though, it can be, while we're here in this world, it can be daunting, because you see all the suffering that's going on, and the war and the murder and the lying, the cheating, the stealing, and all these things that seem horrible to us and overwhelming. And you become sensitive to that, and you hear the most horrific news reports about somebody getting sledgehammered to death or something like that, and you could become depressed. You could think this world is horrible. This is hell on earth. But you have to find the bigger picture and to grow beyond these materialist based episodes. You have to get beyond the body and
Mm.
realize your spiritual multidimensionality, so that you can see that there are spiritual lessons being learned in all of this, but the karma is going to come back. And that's what the afterlife experiences with the life review really bring home to us. And I do think reincarnation is very real. And if you don't learn the lessons this time around, you'll have to come back and keep trying to learn them, which is really a blessing, but it can seem like a horrible sentence. But this life is beautiful if you create beauty in your life. What you create will come back to you as well. So every life is novel, every life is unique. No two people live the same exact life, and no two people see this world in exactly the same way. So, there are billions of viewpoints and paradigms of what this life is all about. And you have to find your own and determine your own. But, it takes some effort, but it can be done. And it can be very enlightening and fulfilling. You can reach a point where you're just almost bursting with love for this life, the beauty and magnificence of it, and so forth. So there are paranormal aspects, and there's the materialist aspect, and so it's all there for us. It's all here for us.
It's all there for us. I love that. Well, Wayne, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. I want to put a plug in for your book, The Journey Across Forever, that just came out recently. Written for the Robert Anton Wilson fan, dedicated to Robert Anton Wilson, covers all the things we've talked about, but so much more, just a collection of wonderful little stories and philosophy as you've presented to us today. We'll get some links to all your stuff in the show notes. Is there anything else you'd like to close with here?
Well, just to thank you for having me on, and I appreciate that. And, I'm delighted. I didn't even know there was all these Facebook pages dedicated to Robert Anton Wilson when I first made contact. And I didn't even know about Hilaritas Press. So it's a great discovery, and to find out that Robert Anton Wilson's daughter, along with Richard Rassa, are the owners and publishers of all of Robert Anton Wilson's work now. And that was a great discovery. And, I just appreciate how kind everybody has been and welcoming to me with my new book when I said I dedicated this book to him, and then found out all about Hilaritas. And now I've had the pleasure of meeting you as well. And I thank you for having me on.
Oh, yeah. It's great having you. And
may we
thanks.
meet again.
May we meet again. Thanks for chatting.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mike.
That concludes the episode. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. A big thank you to Wayne Saalman for taking the time to chat. Thank you, as always, to Christina Pearson of the Robert Anton Wilson Trust and Richard Rassa of Hilaritas Press. John Higgs will be my guest on the next episode, releasing on the 23rd of December. Until then, I am your host, Mike Gathers, signing off with love and cheerfulness. Amor e Hilaritas.